The scent of eucalyptus and lavender was supposed to be soothing, a balm for the frayed edges of a particularly brutal week. I lay face down on the massage table, my head resting in that oddly comfortable cradle, listening to the gentle, almost imperceptible hum of the ventilation system. Outside, the city was a symphony of blaring horns and distant sirens. Inside, it was a sanctuary, or so I hoped. My shoulders felt like concrete, a permanent fixture of tension I'd carried for months, maybe years, without truly acknowledging its weight. This was my grand experiment in self-care, a desperate plea to my own body to just relax. The masseur, Liam, had introduced himself with a quiet, confident voice that immediately put me at ease. His handshake was firm, his eyes kind, and his presence carried an air of calm efficiency. He'd asked about my problem areas, and I'd mumbled something vague about general stress and neck stiffness, omitting the deeper, less tangible ache that resided somewhere in my chest. He left the room for a moment, giving me time to strip down and settle under the crisp white sheet. The air was warm, almost humid, a stark contrast to the biting autumn chill I'd left behind. When he returned, I could feel his presence before I heard him. A soft pad of bare feet on the polished floor, the subtle shift in the air pressure. He started, as most masseurs do, on my back. His hands were strong, warm, and moved with a practiced rhythm, kneading out knots I hadn't even known existed. The initial discomfort gave way to a dull ache, then to a strange, almost pleasant release. I focused on my breathing, trying to sink deeper into the table, letting go of the endless mental to-do list that usually consumed me. "You hold a lot of tension in your traps, Adrian," he murmured, his voice low, a gentle rumble that vibrated through the table. "And your lower back is quite tight, too. Do you sit a lot for work?" "Too much," I managed, my voice muffled by the headrest. "Desk job. The curse of the modern age, I suppose." He chuckled softly, a sound that was surprisingly melodic. "Indeed, but we'll do our best to reverse some of that today." His touch was professional, reassuring. It was exactly what I'd paid for, what I needed. For the first 20 minutes or so, my mind drifted, replaying snippets of conversations, deadlines, and the endless anxieties that typically gnawed at me. But slowly, imperceptibly, Liam's hands began to draw me away from all that. They moved with a kind of intelligence, seeking out points of resistance, coaxing muscles into submission. I felt the stiffness in my neck begin to yield, the stubborn knots in my shoulders unraveling. It was a physical release, but it was also something more, a mental quietude I rarely experienced. Then things shifted. He moved lower, down my back, past the small of it, towards my glutes. This wasn't unusual. Many massages include this area to release tension that can radiate up the spine. But as he continued, he seemed to use a little more oil, a little too much, perhaps. His hands, previously firm and purposeful, became slicker, almost gliding, and as they moved across the curve of my hip, they lingered just a fraction of a second longer than expected. My breath hitched. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, a ghost of a touch, yet my body registered it immediately. A jolt, not of alarm, but of something far more unsettling. A warmth bloomed low in my stomach, a flush I could feel spreading up my chest. I attributed it to the sheer surprise, the sudden breaking of a subconscious boundary. This was a clinical setting, a professional service. My mind raced, trying to find a logical explanation, to dismiss it as an accidental glide, a miscalculation of pressure or surface area. He continued, his movements flowing, seamless. His thumbs worked into the top of my glutes, loosening what felt like a permanently clenched muscle. Then, with that excess oil, his hands smoothed downwards, just past the fabric line of the disposable briefs, grazing the very top of my inner thigh. It was fleeting, a brush, a suggestion, but it was undeniable. My entire body went rigid. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. Every nerve ending seemed to hum with a frantic energy. My mind, which moments before had been a placid lake, was now a turbulent sea. Was this intentional? Was I imagining it? Was my own mind projecting something where there was nothing? He moved back up, continuing his work on my lower back with renewed focus, as if nothing had happened. The rhythm of his strokes was steady, unhurried. He said nothing, his breathing even and calm. I, however, was anything but. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat. My skin felt hyper-aware, tingling from head to toe. I tried to regain my composure, to force my thoughts back to the eucalyptus scent, to the quiet hum. But it was impossible. The memory of that brief, startling contact pulsed through me. It wasn't explicitly sexual, not in a crude or aggressive way. It was exploratory, curious, a question asked without words, answered by my body's immediate, visceral reaction. My cheeks felt hot. A flush of embarrassment mixed with something else I couldn't quite name. Shame? Excitement? Confusion? I didn't know. All I knew was that the professional barrier had been breached, not violently, but gently, almost coaxingly. He moved to my other side, repeating the movements, and this time I was braced for it. My muscles tensed involuntarily, even as my mind screamed at them to relax again. The hands, slick with oil, moved with a deliberate slowness. Again the glide, the slight pause, the brush against the upper inner thigh, closer this time, more definite. A gasp caught in my throat, swallowed before it could escape. My eyes squeezed shut. This was no accident. This was a clear, unambiguous exploration. And the most startling thing? A part of me, a very primal, deeply buried part of me, responded. A spark ignited, a familiar, unwelcome warmth that sent a shiver down my spine. I was Adrian, 34, ostensibly straight, in a long-term, if somewhat stagnant, relationship with Sarah. We'd been together for 7 years, cohabiting for 5. Our life was comfortable, predictable, filled with shared routines and quiet companionship. Passion, however, had slowly dwindled to embers, occasionally stirred, but rarely blazing. I loved Sarah, of course I did. She was kind, intelligent, and steady. But lately I'd felt a hollowness, a yearning for something more, something undefined, a longing I hadn't dared to articulate even to myself. And now here I was, on a massage table, responding to the illicit touch of a male masseur. The realization crashed over me, swift and brutal. My carefully constructed identity felt like it was fracturing, revealing fault lines I hadn't known existed. Liam continued his massage, moving from my lower back to my arms. His touch was firm yet gentle, a stark contrast to the previous, more intimate moments. He worked my triceps, then my forearms, his thumbs pressing into the muscle with precise pressure. I tried to focus on the physical sensations, to compartmentalize, to pretend that the last few minutes hadn't happened. But the ghost of his touch lingered, a brand on my skin, a searing memory in my mind. He moved to my legs, beginning with my calves. My breath caught again. Would he repeat it? Would he push further? A strange combination of dread and anticipation tightened my chest. He kneaded my calves, then my hamstrings, his hands strong and skilled. The movements were purely professional, targeted at relieving muscle tension. My inner conflict waged silently. Was I crazy? Was I overthinking this? Was I projecting my own hidden desires onto a harmless situation? But then he moved to my inner thighs, and the professional facade cracked once more. His thumbs pressed deep into the adductor muscles, a place where tension often hid. But the pressure wasn't just therapeutic. It was deliberate, suggestive. His fingers splayed, covering more skin than strictly necessary, and his palm lingered, warm and heavy, just a little too high, a little too close to the nexus of my sexuality. My body was a betrayer. Despite my internal protestations, despite the fear and confusion, a profound sense of arousal began to stir within me. It wasn't just physical, it was deeply emotional, a recognition of something dormant finally waking up. It was a desire I hadn't allowed myself to acknowledge, a curiosity I'd suppressed for years. The sheer audacity of it, the unexpectedness, the forbidden nature. It all coalesced into a potent, intoxicating cocktail. I kept my face buried in the headrest, feigning deep relaxation, hoping my flushed skin and rapid breathing weren't too obvious. I could feel the blood thrumming through my veins, a frantic symphony. He moved away, up to my shoulders again, as if the exploration was over, the question asked and the answer, perhaps, received. The relief was immediate, but it was also tinged with a strange disappointment. I hated myself for it. This was wrong, all of it. "Flip over onto your back, Adrian," he said, his voice as calm and professional as when he'd first greeted me. My heart lurched. This was the moment. The full frontal. Would he continue his unspoken exploration? Would he dare? I slowly turned, pulling the sheet up to my chest, a small shield against the vulnerability I felt. My eyes were tightly shut for a moment, gathering courage, bracing myself. When I opened them, Liam was standing beside the table, a neutral expression on his face. He poured more oil into his hands, his movements fluid and unhurried. He started on my chest, working around my pectoral muscles. His hands were warm, strong, and entirely appropriate. No lingering, no undue pressure. Just therapeutic massage. I tried to analyze his expression, his posture, for any hint of what had transpired, but he was a picture of professional composure. Was it all in my head? Had I misinterpreted? The doubt began to creep in, gnawing at the certainty of my earlier reactions. Perhaps I was just overly sensitive, projecting my own suppressed desires onto an innocent interaction. But then he moved to my arms, working from my shoulders down to my hands. And when he reached my inner bicep, his thumb ran deliberately, slowly, along the sensitive skin, just a little too long, just a little too close to my armpit, where the skin was soft and vulnerable. It was a subtle touch, barely there, but it was enough. A shiver traced its way down my spine. The question was being asked again, in a different language, but just as clear. Then he moved to my legs. My stomach clenched. This was the final frontier, the most exposed. He started with my quads, then my shins, kneading, pressing, releasing. His hands were firm, methodical. My gaze was fixed on the ceiling, trying to project an aura of calm, but inside I was a maelstrom. He moved up my inner thigh, slowly, inexorably. My breathing became shallow, almost imperceptible. He pressed into my adductor muscles, working them with a focused intensity. And then, his fingers, slick with oil, brushed past the elastic of my briefs. Just the very edge, just for a moment. Not overtly, not aggressively, but undeniably there. And then again. A light, feather-like touch, almost playful in its implication. A profound tremor ran through me. It was too much. Too much oil. Too much touch. Too much suggestion. The dam I'd built around my carefully compartmentalized life felt like it was crumbling. I squeezed my eyes shut, a silent plea for it to stop, or to continue. I honestly didn't know which. The touch lingered. A warm, soft pressure against the sensitive skin of my inner thigh, dangerously close to the very core of me. It wasn't a crude grab or an aggressive invasion. It was gentle, almost tender, and that made it infinitely more unsettling. It was an invitation, a silent question posed in the language of touch. My mind reeled. What did I do? Do I speak up? Do I pull away? Do I pretend I didn't notice? The professional code of conduct, the social norms, all screamed at me to react, but my body, traitor that it was utterly paralyzed, caught in the intoxicating grip of something profoundly novel and deeply arousing. The air in the room felt thick, charged with an unspoken tension, an electric current that passed between us. He shifted his weight slightly, and the pressure increased, his palm flat against my inner thigh, fingers splayed, the tips of them brushing against the curve of my hip. and the very edge of the briefs. The warmth spread, intoxicating and deeply unsettling. My breath hitched again, a tiny, almost inaudible sound. Then, just as suddenly as it had intensified, the touch receded. He continued the massage on my legs, his movements still professional, but the air was now irrevocably changed. The silence, previously soothing, was now laden with meaning, with unspoken questions and unspoken answers. The rest of the massage passed in a haze. I barely registered the techniques he used, the pressure he applied. My mind was a whirlwind of confusion, embarrassment, and a strange, potent cocktail of desire and fear. When he finally announced that the session was over, his voice calm and even, I felt a rush of both relief and regret. "Take your time getting up, Adrian," he said, his hand briefly resting on my shoulder, a final, seemingly innocent touch that somehow felt loaded with unspoken meaning. "You're pretty released now. Drink plenty of water." He left the room, leaving me alone in the sudden silence. I lay there for a long moment, my body still tingling, my mind racing, my heart still hammered, and a tremor still ran through me. It was a moment of profound revelation. The touches, the lingering, the exploration. It wasn't a mistake. It was intentional, and my response to it was equally undeniable. Slowly, I pushed myself up, my limbs feeling heavy, almost disconnected. I sat on the edge of the table, wrapping the sheet tighter around me. My cheeks were still flushed, and I could feel the residue of the oil on my skin, a constant reminder of what had just transpired. What did it mean? For me? For him? Was he testing boundaries? Was he gauging my reaction? Or was this just a standard, if highly unconventional, part of his massage technique? The thought was absurd, yet a part of me desperately wanted it to be true, to rationalize away the unsettling intimacy. I got dressed, my movements clumsy, my hands fumbling with buttons and zippers. Each piece of clothing felt like it was being pulled over a different person than the one who had entered this room an hour ago. The old Adrian, the one who was settled and predictable, felt distant, almost a stranger. This new Adrian was a chaotic mess of conflicting emotions, a man who had just had a fundamental part of himself exposed and questioned. When I stepped out into the waiting area, Liam was at the reception desk chatting quietly with the receptionist. He turned as I approached, a small, knowing smile playing on his lips. His eyes, kind before, now held a glint of something I couldn't quite decipher. Curiosity, perhaps, or a shared secret. "Feeling better, Adrian?" he asked, his voice still that low, melodic rumble. "Much," I managed, the word catching in my throat. I avoided his gaze, feeling the flush return to my face. The scent of eucalyptus and lavender, once soothing, now felt overwhelmingly heavy, suffocating even. "Good. You carry a lot, but you let go well," he said, his gaze lingering on my face for a moment, making me feel utterly transparent. "Don't wait so long next time." He handed me a small card with his name and number, for future bookings. Our fingers brushed, and the contact, brief and innocent, sent another jolt through me. It was enough to confirm what my body already knew. There was an undeniable current between us. I mumbled a thank you, paid for the session, and practically fled the spa. The crisp autumn air hit me like a cold shower, but it did little to quell the internal heat. I walked quickly, almost ran. Through the bustling streets, my mind a jumble of thoughts and sensations. The too much oil and the hands explored more than they should have replayed in my mind like a broken record. It was an unspoken invitation, a boundary pushed, a question asked in the most intimate of ways, and my body's reaction, the undeniable arousal, the confusion, the strange sense of being seen and understood in a way I hadn't been in years, was the answer. I got home, my keys fumbling in the lock. Sarah was on the sofa, scrolling through her phone, a half-empty mug of tea on the coffee table. She looked up, her expression warm and familiar. "Hey, you're back. How was the massage?" she asked, her voice soft. Good, really good, I lied, my voice sounding strained even to my own ears. I tried to mask the tremor, the lingering heat in my cheeks. Very relaxing. She nodded, smiling. Glad to hear it. You looked like you needed it. I went to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, trying to compose myself. My reflection in the dark window showed a man who looked utterly shaken, his eyes wide and a strange mixture of excitement and fear playing across his features. This wasn't just a massage. This was a crack in the carefully constructed facade of my life. It was an awakening, an unsettling realization that the desires I thought I'd buried, the questions I hadn't dared to ask myself, were still very much alive, and they had been stirred, profoundly and undeniably, by a masseur named Liam, who used too much oil and whose hands had explored far more than they should have. The world suddenly felt a little bit sharper, a little bit more vibrant, and infinitely more complicated. The quiet companion I'd been living with, the predictable future I'd envisioned, now seemed clouded, uncertain. The comfortable life I'd built with Sarah felt like it was teetering on the edge of a precipice, all because of a touch, a series of touches, that had peeled back layers of self-deception and revealed a landscape of longing I had long denied. What would I do with this revelation? How would I navigate the treacherous waters of my own newly unearthed desires? The questions swirled, unanswered, as the scent of eucalyptus and lavender seemed to follow me, a potent, intoxicating reminder of the day I truly woke up. I clutched the small card with Liam's name and number in my hand, feeling its edges dig into my palm, a physical anchor to the storm that had just erupted within me. The future, once clear, was now an uncharted territory, and I felt both terrified and, strangely, thrillingly, alive. The scent of lavender and something earthy, something uniquely him, clung to my clothes for days. I tried to wash it out, but it lingered, a phantom reminder that played tricks with my mind. It was subtle, almost imperceptible to anyone else, but to me, it was a persistent whisper, a secret I couldn't quite shake. Every time I caught a whiff, it was like a jolt, bringing back the heat of his hands, the surprising slickness of the oil, and the slow, deliberate journey his fingers had taken across my skin. Adrian. That's me. And honestly, I hadn't felt this confused in a long time. My life usually ran on a fairly predictable track. Work, gym, dinner with friends, the occasional not quite serious date. Nothing too dramatic, nothing that sent my thoughts spinning in circles for hours on end. But Leo had definitely derailed my usual equilibrium. I found myself staring at the ceiling at 3 a.m. more often than not, replaying those moments. Was it a mistake? A professional oversight, maybe? Too much oil, a slip of the hand, an accidental brush against a boundary that shouldn't have been crossed? Or was it something else? The way his touch had lingered, the pressure that felt just a fraction too firm, the almost imperceptible hesitation before he moved on. My mind was a battleground, one side arguing for professional mishap, the other for something far more deliberate, far more intriguing. And that was the really troubling part, wasn't it? The intrigue. I was supposed to be uncomfortable, perhaps even offended. Instead, a peculiar warmth had spread through me, a flush that had nothing to do with the heated massage table. I remembered the quickening of my pulse, the subtle clenching of my jaw as I fought to remain outwardly calm, while inwardly, a very different kind of tension was coiling. It wasn't purely sexual, though an undeniable current had run through me. It was more about a sudden, unexpected intimacy, a revelation that someone could touch me in a way that felt both forbidden and intensely desired. The problem was, I had no reference point for this. My last serious relationship had ended almost a year ago, leaving me with a sense of quiet solitude rather than heartbreak. Michael was a good guy, but we drifted apart, the spark fading into a comfortable, predictable ember that eventually just died out. Since then, I'd been perfectly content with my own company, with a few casual encounters here and there that never quite touched the deeper parts of me. My emotional landscape had become a rather flat terrain, and Leo felt like a sudden volcanic eruption. I considered calling Daniel, my best friend, but then I stopped myself. How would I even begin to explain it? So, Dan, I had a massage, and the masseur, well, his hands were a little adventurous, and I think I might have liked it. A lot. What do you think that means? It sounded ridiculous, pathetic even. Daniel would probably offer a sarcastic comment about me being deprived, then insist I get back on the dating apps. But this wasn't about simply getting back out there. This was different. This was about a feeling that had surprised me, a sensation that had cracked open something I hadn't realized was locked away. Days turned into a week. My work, usually a source of focused engagement, became a hazy backdrop to my internal monologue. I'd find myself staring at my computer screen, a half-written email suspended, while my thoughts drifted back to the pressure points on my lower back, the glide of his palms over my thighs, the almost imperceptible brushing of his knuckles against a sensitive curve. It felt illicit, even though technically nothing truly inappropriate had occurred. He hadn't said anything, hadn't done anything overtly sexual. It was all in the nuance, in the unspoken communication of touch, and in my response to it. I finally gave in, not by calling Daniel, but by going back to the source of my torment, the website for The Sanctuary, Leo's massage studio. I told myself I was just looking at their services, maybe comparing prices, convincing myself I needed a different kind of massage, a more straightforward, strictly therapeutic one. But my finger hovered over the Book Now button, my eyes scanning for Leo's name. He wasn't listed by name, only by availability. I remembered his schedule from the first time, Monday, Wednesday, Friday evenings. My stomach did a flip. Could I do it? Could I go back there, knowing what I knew, feeling what I felt? What if it was a one-off? What if he was just like that with everyone and I was reading too much into it? The thought brought a pang of disappointment, a small, cold dread that settled in my chest. And what if it wasn't a one-off? What if he remembered me? Remembered the almost imperceptible tremor in my muscles, the slight shift of my hips into his touch? The idea was both terrifying and exhilarating. My finger finally tapped the screen. I chose a Wednesday evening, 2 weeks out, enough time for me to forget, or for the memory to solidify into something I couldn't ignore. As soon as the confirmation email landed in my inbox, a wave of nervous excitement washed over me. There was no turning back now. I had bought myself a ticket to the unknown. The 2 weeks crawled by. I found myself thinking of reasons to cancel. Too busy at work, a sudden fictional illness. But deep down, I knew I wouldn't. I was drawn to this, like a moth to a flame, a little scared of getting burned, but even more afraid of missing out on whatever light this could bring. The day finally arrived. I spent the morning in a strange state of anticipation, my energy levels oscillating between buzzing anxiety and a profound sense of calm. I went to the gym, trying to work off some of the nervous energy, but even there, my mind wandered. Would he remember my name? My face? Would there be a subtle flicker of recognition in his eyes? Or would he simply treat me like any other client, a blank slate for his skilled hands? The thought of the latter brought a strange ache, a sense of having overinvested in a fantasy. I dressed carefully that evening, not overly formal, but not sloppy. A simple t-shirt, comfortable jeans. I wanted to look presentable, but not like I was trying too hard. This was just a massage, after all. A therapeutic session. Right. I almost laughed at the transparent lie I was telling myself. When I arrived at the sanctuary, the reception area was quiet. The same calming music played. The same subtle incense drifted through the air. A different receptionist, a young woman with a kind smile, greeted me. "Adrian, for a 7 p.m. session?" she asked, consulting her tablet. "That's right," I managed, my voice a little tighter than usual. "Leo will be with you in a moment. He's just finishing up with a client." My heart gave a little thump. Leo, he was here. He remembered my name, or at least it was on the booking. I sat in one of the plush chairs, trying to project an air of nonchalance, but my leg was bouncing almost imperceptibly. I picked up a magazine, flipped through a few pages, absorbing nothing. Every creak of a floorboard, every distant murmur made me tense. Then a door opened down the hall. A woman emerged, looking blissed out, her hair a little disheveled. And behind her, Leo. He was wearing the same dark, simple uniform, his movements fluid and unhurried. He offered the woman a gentle smile as she paid, then turned. His gaze swept the waiting area, and for a split second it landed on me. A flicker. Was it recognition? A momentary widening of his eyes? Or was I just projecting my own desperate anticipation onto him? His smile, professional and warm, broadened just a fraction. "Adrian," he said, his voice as smooth and deep as I remembered. "Welcome back." My breath hitched. He did remember, or at least he had reviewed his appointments for the evening. Either way, the acknowledgement sent a wave of relief and something warmer through me. "Hi, Leo," I replied, standing up, trying to keep my voice even. "Ready for another session?" he asked, gesturing towards the hallway. I nodded, following him down the familiar corridor, the subtle scent of him growing stronger as we walked. My stomach was doing acrobatics. This was it. The moment of truth. He led me into the same treatment room. The lights were dimmed, the air warm, the faint, sweet smell of essential oils already present. He gestured to the bench where I could put my clothes. "I'll give you a few minutes to get comfortable on the table," he said, his eyes meeting mine briefly, face down, under the sheet. He left, closing the door softly behind him. I stripped quickly, my movements clumsy with nerves. As I lay on the table, pulling the crisp sheet over me, my mind raced. What would this session be like? Would it be different? Would he push the boundaries again? Would I allow him to? The questions swirled, mixing with a potent cocktail of fear and desire. I felt strangely vulnerable, exposed even under the sheet. This wasn't just about a massage anymore. This was about acknowledging something unsaid, something simmering beneath the surface. When he returned, his presence filled the room. I heard the gentle clinking of bottles, the soft rustle of towels. Then the familiar weight of his hands on my shoulders, a brief, reassuring pressure. "All right, Adrian," he murmured, his voice close, sending a shiver down my spine. "Let's start with your back." And then, the oil. More than last time, I thought, a little tremor running through me. His hands, warm and strong, began their work. The initial strokes were firm, professional, working out the knots in my shoulders and neck. I focused on my breathing, trying to relax, trying to convince myself this was just a normal massage. But it wasn't. Not for me. Every touch was magnified, every movement scrutinized by my heightened senses. I felt the subtle shift in pressure as he moved down my spine, the deliberate circling of his thumbs along my lower back. And then it began. The exploration. He moved lower, his palms flattening against my glutes, kneading them with a confident ease that felt both intimate and entirely natural. He lingered there, his fingers working deep into the muscle, before gliding to the top of my thighs. The oil made his hands slick, allowing them to traverse the landscape of my body with an almost liquid grace. He didn't hesitate. His thumbs found the soft inner curve of my thighs, just below the crease, and pressed there, a gentle, probing touch that sent a jolt directly to my core. My breath hitched. I could feel the blood rushing through my veins, a warm flush spreading over my skin. I waited, my muscles tensed, wondering if he would pull away, if he would pretend it was an accidental graze. But he didn't. He continued the slow, rhythmic pressure, his fingers moving further, brushing against the delicate skin of my inner thigh. Just a whisper away from what felt like forbidden territory. My mind screamed, "Stop!" My body, however, was a traitor. A profound sense of pleasure was blooming, a warmth that was both sensual and deeply comforting. It felt right, in a way I hadn't realized I craved. I swallowed, my throat suddenly dry, my hands clenched into fists, then relaxed, then clenched again. I wanted to move, to signal something, anything, but I was frozen, caught between wanting him to stop and desperately wanting him to continue. He moved further, his thumb almost grazing the sensitive skin at the apex of my inner thigh. It was so close, so exquisitely close, to a line that once crossed couldn't be uncrossed. I could feel the heat radiating from his hand, the subtle vibration of his touch. Then, just as I thought I might actually explode, he pulled back, slowly. His hands retreated, moving to the outside of my thighs, then down my calves, the pressure still firm and assured. The sudden withdrawal left an odd ache, a lingering ghost of his touch that felt both like relief and disappointment. He worked on my legs, his hands strong and skilled, but the previous moments had shattered any pretense of this being just a routine massage. Every subsequent touch, no matter how innocent, felt imbued with that same electric charge. When he told me to turn over, I did so carefully, trying to hide the slight tremor in my hands. I met his gaze briefly as he adjusted the sheet, and for a fleeting second, I thought I saw something in his eyes. A glint of knowing, a hint of curiosity, perhaps even a shared understanding. Or maybe it was just my imagination, running wild in the dim light. He began working on my chest and arms. His hands were gentle, but still firm, expertly tracing the contours of my muscles. I found myself watching his face as he worked, his brow furrowed in concentration, his lips slightly parted. He had a small scar above his left eyebrow, barely visible, which added a rugged charm to his otherwise soft features. He used less oil on my chest, the friction more direct. His thumbs pressed into my pectorals, moving slowly, rhythmically. I could feel the heat emanating from his hands, seeping into my skin. He moved to my stomach, his touch lighter, more exploratory, circling my navel with a tender pressure that made my breath catch. It was sensual, undeniably so, yet it was also profoundly respectful. There was no aggression, no sense of invasion. It felt like an invitation, a gentle probing of my boundaries, a quiet query, "Are you open to this?" I closed my eyes, letting myself simply feel the warmth, the pressure, the subtle scent of lavender, and him. My entire body felt alive, humming with a suppressed energy. I felt a yearning unfurl within me, a deep-seated desire for connection, for touch that went beyond the superficial. He moved to my arms, his fingers gliding over my biceps, down my forearms. And then he took my hand. His thumb traced the lines on my palm, a soft, intimate gesture that made my breath hitch. He held my hand for a moment longer than necessary, his fingers interlacing with mine before he released it and began working on my other arm. By the time he finished, my body felt both thoroughly worked and completely relaxed, yet my mind was a whirlwind of emotion. As I sat up, pulling the sheet closer, he offered me a glass of water. "How is that, Adrian?" he asked, his voice calm, professional, yet I sensed a hint of something deeper, something unsaid, lurking just beneath the surface. "Amazing, Leo," I managed, my voice a little husky. "Really incredible." He smiled, a genuine, warm smile that reached his eyes. "Good. You carry a lot of tension in your lower back and glutes. I tried to release some of that." My cheeks flushed. He knew. He definitely knew where he had lingered, where he had pushed. "You certainly did," I said, trying to sound nonchalant, but I could feel the heat rising in my face. He simply nodded, his gaze lingering on mine for a moment longer than strictly professional. There was an unspoken exchange, a silent acknowledgement of the energy that had passed between us. "Take your time getting dressed," he said, turning to leave. "I'll be at the reception desk." As the door clicked shut, I let out a long, shaky breath. My hands were trembling slightly. What just happened? It wasn't explicit, not by any means, but it was undeniably intimate. It was a dance on the edge, a flirtation played out through touch and silence. I dressed slowly, my mind replaying every detail. The brush of his thumb, the lingering pressure, the way his eyes had met mine. There was a thrill, a delicious kind of danger in it, but also a growing sense of trust. He hadn't overstepped. He had merely offered an invitation, one that I had silently accepted through my stillness, my receptiveness. When I emerged, Leo was indeed at the reception desk, chatting quietly with the receptionist. He looked up as I approached, his smile easy. "All set?" he asked. "Yes," I said, reaching for my wallet. "How much do I owe you?" "It's already taken care of," he said, and my brows furrowed in confusion. "You paid when you booked online." "Oh, right," I mumbled, feeling a little foolish. My mind was clearly not on practicalities. "Do you want to book another session, Adrian?" he asked, his gaze direct. My heart gave another thump. This was the moment, the decision point. Part of me, the rational part, screamed, "Run! This is unprofessional. This is complicated." But another part, a deeper, quieter voice, whispered, "Say yes. See where this goes." I hesitated for only a second. "Yes," I said, surprising myself with the conviction in my voice. "I would like to. When are you free next week?" He consulted his tablet, his finger scrolling down the screen. "I have a couple of openings. How about Tuesday evening, or Friday afternoon?" I thought for a moment. Tuesday felt a little too soon, a little too eager. Friday afternoon felt more relaxed. "Friday afternoon," I said. 3 p.m.? "Perfect," he said, typing it into the system. He handed me a small card with the details of my next appointment. Our fingers brushed, and this time the touch felt less accidental, more deliberate. A spark. "I'll see you then, Adrian," he said, his smile still warm, his eyes holding a depth I hadn't noticed before. "Looking forward to it, Leo," I replied, and the words felt incredibly true. As I walked out of the sanctuary and into the cool evening air, a profound sense of lightness settled over me. The confusion hadn't entirely dissipated, but it was now tinged with an exhilarating anticipation. I wasn't entirely sure what I was doing or where this unspoken invitation was leading, but for the first time in a long time, I felt a spark of genuine excitement. My world, which had felt a little gray and muted, suddenly had new colors, and a very distinct, very appealing scent. I knew this was dangerous territory, breaking boundaries, blurring lines, but I also knew, with a certainty that startled me, that I wanted to explore it. I wanted to see where Leo's hands would take me next, and more importantly, where this unexpected connection would lead my heart. The journey had begun, and I was ready for the next step, no matter how uncertain. YouTube policies considerations to be applied to the full story once completed. Given the nature of the story, which involves adult themes of intimacy, emotional exploration, and potentially escalating physical closeness within a romantic context, adherence to YouTube's content policies would be paramount if this were to be adapted for a video platform. No explicit sexual content. The story explicitly states without explicit or offensive content, and focus should be on a nuanced narrative style. This aligns perfectly with YouTube's guidelines. Any adaptation would need to ensure that no actual sexual acts are depicted, even subtly. The focus should remain on the emotional and psychological aspects of the character's journey, the buildup of tension, euphoria, and the development of their relationship through subtle interactions and internal monologues. Nudity and sexual content. While massages are central to the premise, any visual depiction would need to be carefully handled. No full nudity or sexually suggestive nudity. The focus should be on the professional aspect of the massage while highlighting the emotional and internal responses of the characters to the touch. Close-ups of hands, faces, and subtle body language conveying emotion would be acceptable, but not exploitative or sensational. Sexualized content for adults. The story would fall under sexualized content due to the intimate nature of massage and the developing romantic tension. This means it would likely be age restricted. YouTube's policies allow for sexual content that is not explicit or gratuitous, provided it is contextualized and not promoting illegal or harmful acts. This story, focusing on a consensual, developing adult relationship, would fit within those parameters for age restriction. Hate speech/discrimination. The story is a gay love story. It would need to be presented in a way that is respectful and inclusive, showcasing the relationship positively without any derogatory or hateful undertones towards LGBTQ+ individuals. The story's intent is to portray a gay love story with sensitivity and emotional depth, which directly counters hate speech. Harassment and cyberbullying. The interactions between characters must remain respectful and consensual. There should be no elements of harassment or non-consensual acts, which the story's premise, love story, sensitivity, emotional depth already dictates. Metadata and thumbnails. If adapted for YouTube, the title, description, tags, and thumbnail would need to accurately reflect the content and avoid misleading or overly provocative imagery that could violate policies. For instance, a thumbnail wouldn't show anything explicit, but perhaps a tender glance or a suggestive but non-sexual close-up of hands. Context and artistic merit. The narrative's focus on nuanced narrative style, emotional depth, and complex feelings and relationships would likely be viewed as providing artistic and storytelling context for the adult themes, which YouTube often considers when evaluating content. In summary, a YouTube adaptation of this story would require careful consideration of visuals and explicit language to ensure it remains within the boundaries of age-restricted content, prioritizing emotional storytelling over any graphic or sensationalized depictions of intimacy. It had been weeks, maybe even a couple of months, since that first massage, the one that had messed with my head and, honestly, my entire world. Things with Liam had progressed in a way I hadn't anticipated, hadn't even known I was looking for. It wasn't a whirlwind romance, not the kind you see in movies with grand gestures and passionate declarations after 3 dates. Ours was a slower burn, a gradual unfurling, like watching a seed sprout and slowly reach for the sun. Each meeting felt like another layer peeling back, revealing something new, something deeper. We'd gone from cautious coffee dates to long walks in the park, then to dinners where the conversation flowed as easily as the wine. I found myself looking forward to his texts, to his calls, to the sound of his voice. My days started feeling a little brighter, a little more expectant. And it wasn't just the prospect of seeing him, it was how he made me feel when we were together. He had this calm, steady presence that was incredibly grounding, and yet he sparked something restless and curious within me. One Tuesday evening, after a particularly draining day at the office, Liam suggested we just order takeout and watch a movie at his place. It was a casual invitation, the kind you extend to someone you're comfortable with, someone who doesn't require a performance. That simple offer felt incredibly intimate. I remember arriving at his apartment, a place I'd only ever dropped him off at after dates. The lights were soft, a jazz playlist was whispering from a speaker, and the scent of something warm and spicy, his cooking, probably, mingled with the faint aroma of the essential oils he used for his work. It wasn't fancy, but it was inviting, lived in, and distinctly him. He greeted me with a relaxed smile, the kind that crinkled the corners of his eyes, and a hand resting briefly on my arm. No grand embrace, no awkward kiss, just a genuine, quiet welcome. "Rough day?" he asked, seeing the slump in my shoulders. I just nodded, letting out a tired sigh. "You have no idea. Client meeting went sideways, then my boss decided it was the perfect time to dump a new project on my desk." "Sounds like you need to unwind," he said, already pouring me a glass of water. then gesturing to the sofa. "Take a load off. Food will be here in a bit." I sank into the cushions, feeling the tension slowly begin to leach out of me. Being there in his space felt safe, not just physically, but emotionally. I could drop the corporate mask, the polite facade. I could just be Adrian. We talked about our days while we waited for the food, and then as we ate. It was easy, comfortable conversation about mundane things, but woven into it were observations about life, shared laughs, and moments of quiet understanding. He had a way of listening that made you feel truly heard, not just waited for your turn to speak. Later, curled up on the sofa, watching some indie film neither of us really cared about, I felt his arm casually drape over the back of the sofa behind me. It wasn't a move, not an escalation. It was just there, a warm, reassuring presence. I leaned into it slightly, letting my head rest near his shoulder. The soft hum of the movie, the gentle rise and fall of his chest, the faint scent of him. It all combined into a feeling of profound peace. "You know," I said quietly, the words surprising me even as they left my lips, "I haven't felt this relaxed in I don't know how long." He shifted slightly, his voice a low rumble. "Good. That's what I aim for, after all." There was a light teasing note in his voice, but also something deeper, a genuine desire for my well-being. I chuckled softly. "Beyond the massage table, I mean." He hummed in agreement. "Yeah, I get that." He paused, then continued, his voice a little softer. "It's important to find those moments, Adrian, to let go. Life can be pretty relentless if you don't create space for it." And that was Liam, always with a gentle insight, a quiet wisdom that often made me stop and think. He wasn't preachy, never told me what to do, but he had a way of framing things that resonated. It was in moments like these that I realized just how deeply I was starting to care for him. It wasn't just physical attraction, though that was undeniably there, simmering beneath the surface. It was a connection of minds, of spirits, a mutual respect that felt incredibly rare. The biggest hurdle, and the one I'd been avoiding addressing head-on, was my long-term relationship with Mark. Mark and I had been together for 7 years. 7 years! We had a shared apartment, shared friends, a shared history. We'd built a life together, brick by brick. But somewhere along the line, the mortar had started to crack. It wasn't any one catastrophic event. It was a slow, subtle drifting apart. Our conversations had become functional rather than intimate. Our touches had become habit rather than desire. We were roommates, companions. But the spark, the passion, the deep emotional resonance had faded. Being with Liam, feeling what I felt with Liam, illuminated the vast emptiness that had grown between Mark and me. It was like living in a grayscale world and suddenly being shown a full spectrum of color. Guilt was a heavy cloak I wore most days. Guilt for feeling what I felt, for betraying the years with Mark, for even considering dismantling the life we'd built. But then there was the counter-argument, the insistent voice in my head. Wasn't I allowed to be happy? Wasn't I allowed to feel this deeply? The next morning, after I'd showered and was getting ready for work, Liam was in the kitchen, brewing coffee. The smell was heavenly. He offered me a mug, black, just how I liked it, and a plate with a piece of toast. It felt domestic, natural. Too natural, perhaps, for someone I was supposedly just casually dating while still in another relationship. "Thanks," I said, taking a grateful sip. The warmth spread through me, both from the coffee and the quiet kindness of the gesture. He leaned against the counter, watching me with that calm, assessing gaze. "You seem a bit preoccupied, Adrian." I sighed, setting my mug down. There was no point in pretending with him. He saw too much. "It's Mark," I admitted, the name feeling heavy on my tongue. "And us. Everything." I waved a hand vaguely, encompassing the unspoken complexities. Liam didn't flinch, didn't recoil. He just nodded slowly. "I figured it might be. You've mentioned him before, but not in much detail. I sensed there was something unresolved there. His understanding, rather than judgment, loosened something in my chest. We've been together a long time, 7 years. It's comfortable. Or it was, but it's not really there anymore, if that makes sense. I looked at him, searching his eyes for something. Pity? Disapproval? I found neither, just a quiet, empathetic listening. It makes perfect sense, he said gently. Relationships evolve. Sometimes they grow apart. It happens. But it feels messy, like I'm being unfair to him, unfair to myself for letting it go on, unfair to you for being here, doing this. The words tumbled out, a confession I hadn't realized I needed to make. He pushed off the counter and came to sit beside me at the small kitchen table. He reached out, his hand covering mine, his touch warm and firm. It wasn't the kind of touch that had initially startled me on the massage table, exploratory and boundary pushing. This was comforting, grounding. Adrian, he said softly, his gaze steady, you don't owe me anything, and you definitely don't need to feel guilty for exploring your own feelings. What you and Mark have or had, that's between you two, but your feelings, your heart, those are yours alone. But what if I'm just confused? What if this is just a rebound or a fascination with something new? I voiced the fear that had been gnawing at me. He squeezed my hand. That's a valid question, and it's one only you can answer. But from my perspective, what we're building isn't superficial. It feels real. It feels important. And I wouldn't be here, opening my home and my heart to you, if I didn't believe that. His words, opening my heart to you, resonated deeply. It wasn't a declaration of love, but it was an acknowledgement of something significant, something he was taking seriously. It gave me courage, a sense of validation I hadn't realized I craved. That conversation was a turning point. It brought the unspoken into the open, clearing the air and making the path forward seem, if not easy, then at least clearer. I knew what I had to do. The next few days were a blur of nervous energy. I tried to talk to Mark, but the words kept catching in my throat. How do you tell someone you've shared so much with that you've changed, that you've fallen for someone else, that the life you built together isn't enough anymore? The conversation finally happened on a Friday night. Mark was making dinner, something he always did when he wanted to decompress after a long week. I sat at the kitchen island, watching him chop vegetables, feeling like an alien in my own home. Mark, I started, my voice barely a whisper. He hummed, not looking up. Yeah? We need to talk. The cliché hung in the air, thick and heavy. He stopped chopping, slowly put the knife down, and turned to face me. His eyes, usually warm and gentle, were suddenly wary. He must have sensed it. We both had, probably for months, but neither of us had dared to give it a voice. The conversation was long, painful, and punctuated by silence heavier than words. I tried to be as kind as possible, to explain that it wasn't his fault, that it wasn't about finding someone better, but about realizing what I needed, what I had been missing. Of course, the truth about Liam had to come out eventually. It hurt him deeply, and that hurt me too. Seeing the pain in his eyes was agonizing. He asked all the questions I expected. Who is he? How long? Were you cheating? I admitted to the emotional cheating, to the growing connection with Liam while still living with him, and the physical intimacy that had been so rare between us for so long that I almost hadn't counted it. It was a messy, ugly truth, but it had to be said. He accused me of being selfish, of chasing a fantasy, of throwing away 7 years for something new and uncertain. And a part of me, the terrified, guilt-ridden part, agreed with him. But the deeper, more insistent part knew I couldn't go back. I couldn't pretend anymore. By the end of the night, tears had been shed by both of us. The decision was made. We would separate. It was amicable in the sense that we weren't screaming at each other, but it was heartbreaking in its finality. The apartment, the shared life, the intertwined futures. All had to be disentangled. The days and weeks that followed were a blur of practicalities, sorting belongings, finding a new place for Mark. He generously offered to find somewhere else first, knowing the apartment meant a lot to me, and navigating the awkward silences and forced pleasantries when we were in the same room. Our friends were confused, some understanding, some judgmental. It felt like my life was undergoing a seismic shift, and I was just trying to stay upright. During this tumultuous period, Liam was my rock. He didn't pressure me, didn't demand anything. He just offered unwavering support. He listened for hours, let me vent, let me cry, and sometimes just sat with me in comfortable silence. He made me feel seen, validated, and loved in a way I hadn't realized I was starved for. He never said, "I told you so," even though he easily could have. He simply held space for my pain and my confusion, and for the budding hope I felt with him. One evening, after another particularly difficult conversation with Mark about finances and dividing possessions, I went straight to Liam's apartment. I was emotionally drained, feeling raw and exposed. He opened the door, took one look at my face, and without a word, pulled me into a hug. It was a full-body embrace, comforting and protective. I buried my face in his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, the scent of him, that subtle mix of his natural musk and the calming essential oils. I could feel the tension in my own body slowly unwinding. "It's done," I whispered against his shirt, the words catching in my throat. We're really over." He held me tighter for a moment, then gently guided me inside, sitting me down on the sofa. He didn't ask for details, didn't pry. He just sat beside me, his hand resting on my knee. "I'm sorry it was so hard, Adrian." "It needed to happen," I said, looking at him, a fresh wave of tears stinging my eyes. "But it still hurts, to let go of so much history." "Of course it does," he agreed, his voice soft. "It's a loss, even if it's the right decision. Allow yourself to feel that. Don't try to rush through it." He made me a cup of herbal tea, lit a few candles, and put on some quiet instrumental music. We talked, but mostly we just existed in each other's company. He told me about a challenging client he'd had that day, about a book he was reading, about a dream he had of opening his own holistic wellness center someday. Simple things, but they helped pull me out of my own head, out of the dark spiral of guilt and sadness. He made me laugh, genuinely laugh, for the first time in days, with a self-deprecating story about burning dinner. As the evening deepened and the tea cooled in our mugs, I felt a shift. The intense sorrow began to recede, replaced by a quiet sense of relief, and something else. A profound gratitude for Liam. I looked at him, really looked at him, the soft candlelight playing on his features, highlighting the kindness in his eyes, the gentle curve of his lips. "Thank you," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "For everything. For just being here." He smiled, a gentle, understanding smile. "You don't have to thank me, Adrian. This is where I want to be." He reached out, his fingers tracing the line of my jaw, then moving to cup my cheek. His thumb brushed gently over my skin, a soft, intimate gesture that sent a shiver through me. I think I'm falling in love with you, Liam," I blurted out, the words escaping before I could censor them. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. My heart hammered in my chest, waiting for his reaction. Had I said too much? Too soon? His eyes widened slightly, a flicker of surprise, but quickly replaced by a profound tenderness. He leaned in closer, his gaze never leaving mine, a silent question in his eyes. He didn't say anything immediately, just kept looking at me, searching my face, as if confirming the truth of my words. Then he leaned in further, his lips brushing against mine. It wasn't a forceful kiss or a demanding one. It was soft, exploratory, questioning. I met him halfway, my own lips parting slightly. And then, as if an invisible barrier dissolved, the kiss deepened. It was slow, tender, filled with all the unspoken emotions of the past weeks. It was a kiss of understanding, of comfort, of burgeoning love. His hand moved from my cheek to the back of my neck, his fingers tangling in my hair, pulling me gently closer. In that kiss, I felt everything: the exhaustion, the relief, the raw pain of a chapter closing, and the exhilarating hope of a new one beginning. It was a kiss that sealed a silent promise, a confirmation of the gravity that had been pulling us together. My own hands found their way to his waist, holding on to him as if he were the only stable point in a world that had been spinning out of control. When we finally broke apart, breathless, our foreheads rested against each other. His eyes were shining, a soft vulnerability in them that mirrored my own. "I think I'm falling in love with you too, Adrian," he whispered, his voice husky. "More than I think, actually. I know it." The weight that had been on my chest for so long, the burden of guilt and uncertainty, lifted a little more. His words, so simple and sincere, filled a void I hadn't fully recognized until that moment. We spent the rest of the night just talking, not about Mark, not about the past, but about us, about our hopes, our fears, our dreams for the future. We talked about what we wanted this relationship to be, the kind of commitment we were looking for. It was honest, open, and incredibly intimate. I didn't stay the night that time. I needed to go home to my empty apartment, to sit with the silence and the fresh start, to truly process the monumental shifts in my life. But as I left Liam's place, walking under the cool night sky, I felt lighter than I had in years. The air felt crisper, the stars seemed brighter. I was walking into the unknown, yes, but for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid. I was excited. Because the unknown wasn't just a void, it was a space waiting to be filled, to be built, with Liam by my side. Over the next few weeks, as Mark gradually moved out and I began the slow, sometimes overwhelming process of reorganizing my life, Liam was a constant, steady presence. He helped me pack boxes, listened patiently when I got frustrated, and often just showed up with my favorite coffee or a home-cooked meal, knowing I'd probably forgotten to eat. His practical support was invaluable, but it was his emotional presence that truly made the difference. He was living proof that love wasn't just about grand gestures, but about consistency, empathy, and being there through the messy parts. One Saturday, a few weeks after Mark had officially moved out, I was surrounded by half-packed boxes, feeling utterly overwhelmed. My apartment, once a shared space, now felt like a lonely cavern echoing with absence. Liam arrived, took one look at the chaos, and, without a word, started helping me sort through books. "You know," he said, picking up a dusty copy of a novel I hadn't read in years, "this process can be cathartic. Deciding what to keep, what to let go of. It's like curating your future." I chuckled, albeit weakly. "It feels more like a never-ending purgatory right now." He smiled, a gentle, reassuring gesture. "It won't last forever. And when it's done, you'll have a space that truly feels like your own, a blank canvas." We worked for hours, punctuated by comfortable silences and light conversation. He had this incredible ability to make even the most tedious tasks feel less daunting. As we sorted through old photos, we stumbled upon a box of pictures from my college days, full of awkward haircuts and questionable fashion choices. We laughed at them, sharing stories, and in those moments, I felt a profound sense of connection, bridging the gaps between our individual histories. Later, sitting on the floor amidst the boxes, exhausted but feeling a sense of accomplishment, I leaned my head on his shoulder. "This is nice," I murmured. "Just being here with you." "Yeah," he agreed, wrapping an arm around me, pulling me closer. "It is." "I never thought I'd find this, Liam," I confessed, my voice quiet. "After so long with Mark, I just assumed that was it. That love was just a comfortable routine, a shared life without the fireworks." He squeezed me gently. Love isn't one size fits all, Adrian, and it definitely shouldn't be a routine. It should be an adventure, a constant exploration. His words, constant exploration, brought me back to that very first massage, to the sensation of his hands on my skin, pushing boundaries, awakening something within me. The memory, once tinged with confusion and a hint of transgression, now felt like a prophecy. You really did explore more than you should have that first day, you know, I said, a mischievous glint in my eye, looking up at him. He met my gaze, a slow smile spreading across his face. Did I? He teased, his voice low and rich. And did you mind? I considered his question, truly considered it. At first, I was utterly bewildered, shocked even, but no. No, I didn't mind. In fact, I think it woke me up. His smile softened, becoming incredibly tender. Good, he whispered, then leaned down and kissed me, a soft, lingering kiss that tasted of warmth and promise. Because I think it woke me up, too. The conversation continued late into the evening. We talked about the future, about what our relationship could be. There was no rush, no pressure, just a shared sense of excitement and a deep, underlying understanding. We realized we were at different stages in life in some ways. He was more settled, more comfortable in his own skin, while I was undergoing a massive transformation. But those differences felt complementary, not divisive. He offered stability, a grounding force, while I perhaps brought a fresh perspective, a new energy. He told me about his own past relationships, the ones that hadn't worked out, the lessons he'd learned. He spoke with a quiet honesty that I found incredibly endearing. He wasn't perfect, but he was perfectly himself, and that was more appealing than any carefully constructed facade. I still have a lot of figuring out to do, I admitted, looking at the half-empty boxes around me, about my life, about what I really want, now that everything's changed. He reached for my hand, interlacing our fingers, and I'll be here, figuring it out with you. We don't have to have all the answers right now, Adrian. We just have to be willing to keep asking the questions, to keep exploring. His words struck a chord. Exploring. It was the perfect metaphor for where we were and where we were headed. Not just physically, but emotionally, intellectually, spiritually. It felt like we were standing on the edge of a vast, uncharted territory, ready to step into it together. I had been so afraid of change, so comfortable in the familiar, even if the familiar was slowly suffocating me. But Liam, with his gentle probing and unwavering presence, had shown me that change could be beautiful, that letting go could create space for something infinitely more fulfilling. My heart, once a quiet, almost dormant thing, felt alive, vibrant, beating in sync with his. The gravity of us was undeniable, pulling us closer, urging us forward into a future I was now, finally, truly ready to embrace. That night, for the first time in what felt like forever, I slept soundly in my own bed, in my own apartment, which was slowly, painfully becoming my home again. But this time I wasn't alone, not truly, because in my dreams, and in the quiet certainty of my waking heart, Liam was there, and the future, once a source of dread, now shimmered with the promise of endless exploration. It was a new beginning, a profound and thrilling new chapter, and I was ready to write it. The scent of espresso and warm pastry was the first thing that greeted me each morning now, a comforting domestic anchor I hadn't realized I was missing until Liam moved in. It had been a gradual shift, like the changing seasons, subtly but irrevocably altering the landscape of my life. First, his toothbrush next to mine, then a small stack of his books on my nightstand, a forgotten shirt draped over a chair, until one day it just made sense for his dresser to be filled with his clothes and for us to share the grocery list. It wasn't a sudden, grand declaration. It was a quiet, unfolding certainty. Living with Liam felt less like a monumental decision and more like the natural progression of a river finding its path to the sea. We'd talked about it, of course, over countless late-night coffees and early morning teas tucked into my worn sofa. our legs tangled together under a blanket. Each conversation had been less about the should we and more about the how we, painting a future in soft, tentative strokes that eventually hardened into a vivid reality. My mornings had always been a solitary affair, a silent ritual of coffee and news, a cocoon of introverted peace. Now they were filled with the soft clatter of mugs, Liam's humming as he made breakfast, and the easy rhythm of our conversations about the day ahead. He'd often catch my eye over the rim of his mug, a warm smile playing on his lips, and in that simple glance I saw a reflection of my own profound contentment. It was a kind of peace I hadn't known existed, a quiet joy that settled deep in my bones. "You're lost in thought again," Liam murmured one Saturday morning, pulling me gently back from the delicious haze of my contemplation. He was kneading dough for bread, his hands dusted with flour, the strong lines of his forearms flexing with each motion. The sun streamed through the kitchen window, bathing him in a warm golden glow, making him look like a figure from a Renaissance painting, albeit one wearing an apron patterned with tiny whales. I chuckled, leaning back in my chair, sipping my coffee, just appreciating the view and the smell of baking bread. "You've truly transformed my life, you know." He grinned, wiping a stray smudge of flour from his cheek with the back of his hand. "Oh, is that my official role now? Chief Life Transformer?" "Among others," I said, a mischievous glint in my eye. Master of the massage table, culinary wizard, and occasional disruptor of my previously impeccable morning routine. He laughed, a rich, full sound that always made my chest feel lighter. "I aim to please, Adrian. But seriously, how are you feeling about everything? About us? About, well, about all of it?" His gaze was earnest, searching, always ensuring I was truly comfortable, truly happy. That was Liam, thoughtful to his core. I set my mug down, walked over to him, and wrapped my arms around his waist, resting my chin on his shoulder. The scent of flour, yeast, and Liam, a unique blend that was becoming indelibly linked with home. "I'm more than fine, Liam. I'm content, happy, in a way I didn't think was possible, honestly. It feels right. Like this is where I was always meant to be." He paused his kneading, turning slightly in my embrace to meet my gaze. His eyes, the color of warm honey, held so much understanding, so much gentle affection. "Me too, Adrian, more than I could have imagined." He kissed the top of my head, then turned back to his dough, his movements fluid and strong. "It's still a bit surreal sometimes, isn't it, how we started?" "Surreal is an understatement," I admitted, pulling up a stool to watch him work. "I still remember walking into your studio for the first time, purely out of curiosity, just wanting to alleviate some stiffness. I certainly wasn't expecting to find this." I gestured vaguely around our shared kitchen at the life we were building. He nodded, a thoughtful expression on his face, and I definitely wasn't expecting that moment to lead to me living in your apartment and making you breakfast every Saturday. He paused, then looked at me directly. "We've talked about it before, the initial discomfort, the boundary that felt blurred. Are you truly at peace with it, Adrian, with how things began?" It was a question he'd asked a few times, gently, always ensuring I had space to express any lingering doubts, and each time my answer had grown clearer, firmer. "More than at peace, Liam. I think it's part of our story now, a testament to how life can surprise you, how connections can form in the most unexpected ways. What started as a moment of curiosity, of unspoken understanding, quickly evolved into something consensual, something real and profound. I wouldn't change it." He smiled, a genuine relief in his eyes. "Good, because I wouldn't either. Even though I still cringe a little at my professional conduct," he added, with a wry twist of his lips, "but it led me to you, so I can't exactly regret it." We spent the rest of the morning in a comfortable domesticity, baking bread, tidying up, and planning our afternoon. This was our life now, a patchwork of ordinary moments, made extraordinary by the simple fact of our shared presence. Navigating the world as a couple, especially one that had formed under such unusual circumstances, brought its own set of complexities. My friends, bless their perceptive hearts, had picked up on the shift in me long before I'd even explicitly told them about Liam. Sarah, always the most observant, had simply said, "You're glowing, Adrian. What's his name?" when we had coffee a few weeks after that pivotal first massage. Telling them had been met with a mix of surprise, delight, and, in Michael's case, a slightly raised eyebrow and a humorous, "So, you found love on the massage table? Good for you, Adrian, stepping outside the apps." Their acceptance had been seamless, a testament to our long-standing friendships. Liam, in turn, had charmed them effortlessly. He had a way of making people feel seen, of listening intently and engaging with genuine interest. He wasn't just my partner. He was quickly becoming their friend, too, a welcome addition to our established dynamic. Seeing him laugh with Sarah over a shared anecdote or debate art history with Michael filled me with a quiet pride. Professionally, things had also shifted. Liam had decided to transition his practice, moving from general wellness massage to specializing in sports recovery and therapeutic bodywork, effectively removing himself from the kind of general client base that might lead to similar situations. It was a conscious choice, not just for us, but for his own sense of integrity. He'd taken additional courses, thrown himself into the science of rehabilitation, and was thriving. His hands, which had once stirred a nascent awakening in me, were now helping athletes recover, easing chronic pain, and making a tangible difference in people's lives. It was another facet of his character I admired deeply: his capacity for growth, his commitment to ethical practice, and his unwavering dedication to helping others. For me, the most significant change had been internal. For years, my life had been carefully curated, a comfortable routine built on predictable patterns and a certain emotional distance. I'd told myself it was self-sufficiency, but in truth, it was a shield. The vulnerability that came with love, with truly letting someone in, was a territory I had long avoided. Liam, with his gentle persistence and unwavering presence, had slowly, patiently dismantled those walls. One evening, as we lay in bed, the city lights painting muted patterns on the ceiling, I found myself sharing details of my past I hadn't spoken aloud in years. Childhood anxieties, past heartbreaks, the quiet fear of not being enough. Liam listened, his hand tracing slow, comforting circles on my back, his breath soft against my hair. He didn't offer facile solutions or interrupt with platitudes. He just listened, holding space for my vulnerability, his silent acceptance more healing than any words could have been. "I think I've been afraid of this," I confessed, my voice barely a whisper. "Afraid of letting someone truly see me, truly know me, afraid of the messiness of it all." He held me tighter. "There's no mess, Adrian, only layers. And every layer I discover makes me love you more." His words were a balm, soaking into the dry, cracked places of my heart, nourishing them back to life. It was then, in that quiet, intimate darkness, that I truly understood the depth of what we shared. It wasn't just passion or companionship. It was a profound, unconditional acceptance. Of course, it wasn't always a smooth sail. No relationship is. There were moments of misunderstanding, tiny ripples in our otherwise calm waters. Liam, with his innate desire to fix things, sometimes struggled when I just needed to vent. And I, accustomed to handling everything independently, occasionally forgot to communicate my needs, expecting him to simply intuit them. But we learned, we talked, we apologized, and we grew. We learned the dance of compromise, the art of active listening, and the importance of allowing each other space while still maintaining connection. One particular Sunday, we'd planned a hike, something we both loved. But the morning dawned gray and drizzly, and my mood mirrored the sky. I'd been wrestling with a challenging project at work, a looming deadline creating a knot of stress in my stomach. I became withdrawn, short-tempered, snapping at Liam over something trivial. He sensed it immediately, of course. "Adrian, what's going on?" he asked, his voice gentle but firm, as I slammed a cupboard door a little too hard. "Nothing," I muttered, turning away to stare out the window at the weeping trees. "Just the weather and work. It's fine." He walked over to me, placing a hand on my shoulder. "It's clearly not fine. You're pushing me away. Tell me what's happening, love." The term of endearment, spoken so softly, broke through my defensive shell. I sighed, letting my shoulders slump. "I'm sorry. It's just this project. It's consuming me. And I'm afraid I'm going to miss the deadline, and it's going to be a disaster, and I just feel overwhelmed." The words tumbled out, a torrent of pent-up anxiety. Liam didn't offer advice. Instead, he simply pulled me into a hug, a warm, grounding embrace. "Okay," he murmured into my hair. "Okay, let's scratch the hike. Today, we'll tackle that project together. Or rather, I'll keep you fed and watered, and provide moral support, and make sure you take breaks. How does that sound?" It sounded perfect. We spent the day working side by side, me hunched over my laptop, him quietly making tea, bringing me snacks, and occasionally coming to rub the tension from my shoulders. He played soft music, kept the apartment cozy, and every now and then would simply appear with a warm mug and a silent, encouraging smile. By evening, the knot of stress had loosened, and the project was back on track. "Thank you," I said, leaning my head on his shoulder as we watched a movie later that night. "For everything. For not letting me retreat." He kissed my temple. "That's what partners do, Adrian. We hold each other up, and I know you do the same for me." And he was right. I had, in fact, done the same for him. When he'd faced a temporary dip in clients during his professional transition, I'd been there, listening, offering practical suggestions, and reminding him of his talent and dedication. When his elderly mother had a health scare, I'd packed us a bag and driven him out to his childhood home, staying with him, offering silent support as he navigated the anxieties of family crisis. Our love wasn't just about the grand gestures, but about these everyday acts of quiet devotion, of seeing and understanding each other's needs, and meeting them with unwavering empathy. It was in the way he knew exactly how I liked my coffee, or how I instinctively knew when he needed a quiet evening after a long day of physically demanding work. It was in the shared laughter over silly things, the comfortable silences, the touch of a hand that spoke volumes. As time moved forward, our conversations naturally turned to the future, to dreams that expanded beyond just sharing an apartment. We talked about travel, about seeing the world together, experiencing different cultures. We talked about potentially buying a place, a home that would truly be ours, a space designed to reflect our combined lives. We even, tentatively, spoke about things like starting a family. The idea, once so distant and abstract, now felt warm and inviting, a natural extension of the love we shared. The prospect of marriage came up one evening, not as a proposal, but as a hopeful musing. We were sitting on our balcony, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and purple, a soft breeze rustling through the leaves of the potted plants. "You know," Liam began, breaking a comfortable silence, "my parents always had this theory that when you find the right person, everything just clicks. You don't have to force it. It just flows." He paused, looking out at the fading light. "I never really understood what they meant until now." I reached for his hand, intertwining our fingers. "Me neither. I always thought love was supposed to be a struggle, something you had to constantly work at, overcome obstacles for." "And it is work, sometimes," he conceded. "But with you, it feels like effortless work, like building something beautiful, piece by piece, knowing each piece fits perfectly." He turned to me then, his eyes full of a profound tenderness. "Adrian, I can't imagine a future without you in it. I want all of it, the good, the bad, the messy, all of it, with you." My heart swelled, a potent mix of joy and a touch of awe. "Me too, Liam. Absolutely me too. I want to build a whole life with you, a shared horizon." He smiled, a gentle, heart-melting smile. "A shared horizon," I like that. The next few months were a delightful blur of planning, of dreaming, of turning those shared horizons into concrete plans. We booked a trip to Italy, a long-held dream for both of us. We started visiting open houses, picturing our lives unfolding within those walls, and in a quiet, intimate moment, one rainy afternoon, curled up on the sofa, Liam formally asked me to marry him. There were no grand gestures, no public spectacles, just the two of us, speaking from the heart, a simple question and an immediate, tearful, joyful yes. The wedding, when it happened a year later, was exactly what we wanted. Small, intimate, surrounded by our closest friends and family, held in a sun-drenched garden. Seeing Liam standing there, waiting for me, his eyes shining with love, felt like the culmination of everything. The journey from that initial, unexpected touch to this moment, standing before him, ready to pledge my life, was a testament to the unpredictable, often messy, but ultimately beautiful path of love. My parents, who had initially been slightly bemused by the origin story of our relationship, were now completely smitten with Liam. My father, a man of few words, had pulled me aside after the ceremony, his eyes a little misty. "He's a good man, Adrian. You found a good one." Coming from my father, that was the highest praise. As for the masseur, who had used too much oil, whose hands had explored more than they should have. That memory, once tinged with confusion and a hint of transgression, had long since transformed. It was no longer a source of discomfort, but a peculiar, almost whimsical origin story, a testament to the wild, winding paths that lead us to our destinies. It was the unconventional spark that ignited a flame, a small, innocent boundary push that blossomed into an expansive, unwavering love. My life with Liam continued to unfold, a rich tapestry woven with threads of shared laughter, quiet comfort, mutual support, and deep, abiding affection. We learned that love wasn't about perfection, but about presence. It was about showing up for each other, even on the difficult days. It was about creating a space where both of us could be our authentic selves, cherished and celebrated. The quiet nights in our home, the smell of Liam's cooking wafting from the kitchen, the gentle hum of our shared existence. These were the moments that defined our lives. Lying next to him in bed, feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing, I often reflected on how far I'd come. The Adrian who had walked into that massage studio, guarded and unknowingly yearning for connection, was a different man now. I was softer, more open, more complete. One evening, as we prepared for bed, Liam looked at me, a playful glint in his eye. "You know," he said, pulling me close, his hands tracing the line of my jaw, "I think I owe that bottle of extra virgin olive oil a thank you, or maybe a quiet apology to my old ethics professor." I laughed, a full, uninhibited sound. "Definitely an apology to your professor. But I'd send the olive oil a bouquet of roses. It certainly set something in motion, didn't it?" He kissed me then, a long, tender kiss that spoke volumes without needing words. It set everything in motion, my love. Everything. And as his hands, now so intimately familiar and utterly welcome, cupped my face, I knew, with absolute certainty, that this was my shared horizon, stretching endlessly before us, beautiful and full of promise. It was a life built not on perfection, but on the profound, messy, glorious foundation of true love, sparked by an unexpected touch and nurtured into an unbreakable bond. My heart, once a carefully guarded fortress, was now an open, vibrant home, brimming with a love that had found its way, against all odds, to me.